Hello and welcome to the 50th anniversary celebration of the Joint Conference. My name is Kia Moffitt, and I'm a young adult in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. New Orleans is a city of celebration. No matter where you go, you'll see us being joyous about something. New Orleans is also a very Catholic city, and at that, a very Black Catholic city. There are 2.9 million Black Catholics in the U.S., which equals 3.8% of the total Catholic population. And of 798 predominantly Black parishes, 74 are in Louisiana. So you can see why New Orleans is the perfect place for a celebration. Four organizations make up the Joint Conference: the National Black Catholic Clergy Caucus, a fraternity of Black Catholic clergy and religious celebrating 50 years. The National Black Sisters Conference, a group of vowed Catholic women religious from many different congregations, also celebrating 50 years. The National Association of Black Catholic Deacons, an organization to nurture deacons. And the National Black Catholic Seminarians Association, which contributes to the well-being of candidates for priesthood and religious life. John 15:16 says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." In this video, I interviewed a priest, a sister, a deacon and his wife, and a seminarian to understand their vocation journey.
Well, my vocation story is very interesting. I started out as a child just loving everything about the church, and I wanted to be a priest from since I can remember, because I wanted to be like Father Daly. Father Daly was just the greatest guy in the world. When he come into the schoolyard, he couldn't walk because all the children would grab his legs and he couldn't walk, and it was very difficult. And I said, I want to be like Father Daly. I want to be a priest. And then I went into high school, and in high school I still had the calling. But as I started to get older, I started to, I guess, like young ladies, and thinking of that I might not be called to the priesthood. And so I said, no, I think I'll wait. I think I'll hold up. I don't think God's calling me to be a priest. I'm called to be something else. And the idea kind of went away, especially once I got into college. It really was a gone conclusion that I was not going to be a priest. And basically, I went into college and I went into the military. And one day, years later, I was walking in the library, and this is where I know it was a call by God, because first of all, I would never at this point in my life would be caught dead in a library, which is a comedy routine in itself. And I happened to be there and run into the first African-American priest to be ordained for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, Father Rayford Emmons, who was one of my heroes when I was a kid. And he said to me, he knew my name, knew my family name, and knew my personal name, and which was a reason for me to be kind of proud about that my hero knows me. Then he said to me, "You were going to be a priest. Whatever happened to that?" And I didn't want to tell him that was because I wanted to do other things. I just said I didn't know. And basically, he spent the next 2.5 hours trying to tell me why I should become a priest. And all I knew, I wanted to get away from him. But the seed was rewatered that was planted by the Holy Spirit. And I started thinking again, why not? And long story short, after that watershed moment, some things happened. And about 7 years after that, I decided to enter the seminary and to just discern once and for all God's call as a priest. And here I am today.
I would say that my call probably started when I was younger. Just by going to church. I grew up in a Baptist church. Went to church every Sunday with my grandmother, my older brother, and so she would always have us involved in something in the church. One of the main things was choir. We would sing in the choir. We became a part of the men's group. So it was always something going on. We're always doing something in church. And so that service type of thing was always there. Didn't really know about deacons as I grew up in school, and I went to Catholic schools, and so didn't see any deacon. Came back to St. Peter Claver, which was my home parish at the time. And so there was a deacon, and that was Rudy Rayfield. Rudy Rayfield was the deacon at the parish, and so it kind of started seeing more of what that was about. And so started to feel that God was calling in some way. And people, God has a way of just planting the seed. And so there were others that I worked with because I was teacher in the school. And so there were those on the faculty that started to kind of just, I guess, plant that seed about ministry.
I wasn't like, oh yeah, this is exciting. I was like, really? Okay. Because I've always seen something in him. As far as, I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was some type of leadership within the church. Wasn't quite sure what it was because when we first met, like he said, he was not Catholic. He was Baptist, raised, grown, all of that. And when he asked me to marry him, he mentioned to the fact that he was going to change his religion. And that I did not want to happen because of me. I didn't want him to become Catholic because I'm marrying this little Catholic girl from New Orleans and I need to be Catholic. No, because if that was the faith that he grew up in, I didn't want it to change because that was a part of him. That's what attracted me to him. But when he made the decision to change to be Catholic and make us one as far as spiritually, I saw change in him also as far as just stepping out. Because when we met, he was sort of quiet. He wasn't always the boisterous deacon that you see on the pulpit preaching and all. He was really quiet. But when he changed over, I saw a want to serve more, to be active in the church.
And so in that, then talked with my wife. And so kind of talked it over. And then we went to our pastor, who was Father Michael Jacques at the time. And talking with Father Michael actually was like, no to it. And so he kind of had his own reasons for why it was. And so for about 3 years, we kind of said we wanted to do this. And he kept saying no, because your pastor had to say yes in order for you to go through it. But see, it's all in God's plan. God has a reason for everything being done. And so at the time, our kids, we had kids too, so our kids were young at that time. So it gave those 3 years for a little more growth with our kids. And then after those 3 years, he then said, okay. And so we began our formation. We did our discernment, year of discernment. And it was when we finished our year of discernment, after that year, Hurricane Katrina hit. And so we were displaced. We received notice from the Archdiocese Office of Permanent Diaconate that we had been selected as one of the 20 men that were selected for formation, to begin the formation process. And so we had to respond. So we talked and we responded yes. And so we came back to New Orleans, and when we came back, we found out that it was only 10. And so it was now ordination day, and so we were at the cathedral. We were there, we went through, and Archbishop Amon was doing the ordination. And so we were the first permanent diaconate class that he was ordaining since coming into the Archdiocese. And so at the end of our ordination, he mentioned that he had heard that we were called the Katrina class. And so he said, you will no longer be known as a Katrina class, but you will be known as a class of hope and perseverance. And so it just kind of confirmed for us that the time that we spent was what we were supposed to do. We were called into it.
Yeah, I grew up in a Catholic family, a large Catholic family in Southwest Louisiana. And I was educated by the Holy Family Sisters. They were my teachers. They were my father's teacher, my mother's teacher. They also taught my aunts. So they were the women I knew growing up. And my family knew. I had relatives who were members of the order. I was inspired by their life, but in a childlike way. Their lives were very mysterious to me because we spent time in the classroom with them, but what happened after they left the classroom, we didn't know. It was always, for me personally, it was very mysterious. I wondered what they did when they left the school, what happened when they went home. Did they sleep at night? What meals did they eat? Did they have arms? Because that was all covered. The head was covered. Did they ever remove the habit, the dress? Because in those days they wore bonnets and gimps, and it was very strange and different, and I wanted to know about it. So I would say my initial desire was not a very spiritual one. It was one born out of curiosity for the mystery. But that changed when I went to high school, and I got to understand a little better. And I really felt God was truly calling me to a life of service. I wanted to be like these women who had been part of my life almost my entire childhood and young adult. So in my high school year, 5 of us from my class entered the convent. And I have been truly blessed in my vocation. I've had opportunities in service and ministry that I know a young, poor, black girl growing up in South Louisiana would probably never have had those opportunities, or maybe in a very different way. Maybe I would have been a mother, maybe I would have been a teacher, I don't know. But I do know that my calling to serve God and to serve the people of God has been a wonderful journey for me, and it's not over yet.
So when I think about my story, my vocation story, and my discernment, I think it is best to go back to when I was younger. There was always something in my heart, always something that was pulling me towards the priesthood, towards the church. I remember the very first time I articulated that I wanted to be a priest. I was in kindergarten, and I was sitting outside of the daily mass chapel at St. Francis Cabrini, where I went to elementary school, and there was an older gentleman who came out of the chapel, and he saw me there, and he looked at me. He was really, really perplexed, and he was like, why are you sitting here? It's like this, 5-year-old kid sitting outside the daily mass chapel was kind of like, why are you here? And I just very nonchalantly but innocently said, I'm watching mass. Because for me that was normal. And he looked at me and he paused and he's like, do you want to be a priest? And with these big eyes, and as if nothing in the world mattered, I was like, yeah, I do. That's what I want, to be a priest. And that's the first moment I remember saying yes. Now, I know that there are moments and there are images of me prior to that. I was the little kid that was a priest for Halloween. But, they had benefits to that. People would give you good candy if you were a priest. But since I was young, that rumbling in my heart, there's this desire pulling me to be in the church, to be around priests. I had a phenomenal example of priesthood in my pastor, Father Michael Jacques, and priests that I've come to encounter, Father Tony Ricard, Bishop Shelton Fabb. There's just a myriad of people, of priests, who I've come to engage with, who've shown me the joy of the priesthood. But as anything with young people, and especially young men, you grow and mature, and the rumblings of your heart sometimes don't always, they're not always compatible with the outside world, what the outside world is telling you. But like I wrestled it in my heart. There were moments where I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna be a priest, and there were moments like, no, I'm not gonna be a priest. It was the day that I was confirmed. Archbishop Hughes was talking about vocations at our confirmation mass, and I was sitting on the front row, and for whatever reason, and maybe it's just my perception, but he was looking dead at me when he was talking, and I felt it was an awkwardness, but there was something really profound about it. And then the next day I went to address some of the bishops about why African American young men are not becoming priests, which I just found the irony of that. When I was going into my senior year of high school, I knew that I would have to face that question of whether or not I was going to go to seminary, whether or not I was going to be a priest. And a wise priest told me, go to university, go to college, don't go to seminary right away. And I'm grateful for that piece of advice, because it allowed me to have an experience of a world of people that I know from that experience will help me in my journey if God is calling me to be a priest. I spent 6 years at CUA. I did my undergrad there. I started as a philosophy major. I couldn't stand philosophy. And then I switched my major to theology. And then during my senior year, I had actually applied for seminary going into my senior year of my undergrad. And when I got accepted, it was like, oh, this is real. And I knew in my heart that at that point I was not ready. Now, you're never ready to enter seminary, but I knew in my heart that that was not the right time. And so I had met with Archbishop Raymond, and I said, Archbishop, I need more time. And he graciously said, take the time that you need. And as a loving shepherd and father that he is, he checked on me throughout that. It was May of last year. I came home, and I was convinced in my mind that I was not coming back to New Orleans for another year. I came home, I bought me a car. I just graduated from my master's. I'm about to really do some great things at the John Paul II Shrine. And God put me in a situation, in a place, at a restaurant with a priest, where that priest asked me, Johnny, when are you going? When are you coming home? Well, I knew what that meant. It wasn't, when are you coming home back to New Orleans? When are you coming home to go to seminary? And I boldly and confidently said, in a year. And he looked at me. He said, you said that 2 years ago. And I said, I know. I know exactly what I said. Well, and then he goes on in this conversation, and he reminds me that 2 years prior, I had applied for seminary, and my letter of acceptance had been written. It was waiting for my yes and the signature from the bishop. I was floored. What does that mean? The interesting thing about that was it planted a seed that did not go away. And I remember I was driving through DC to DuPont Circle, and I couldn't come up with anything else. There were no more excuses that I could come up with. I could not come up with any other answer. And all I could say was, okay, let's do it. And with those words, I became a seminarian of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. I was confused out of my mind after I said that. It's like, what did I just do? There's a fear. There's a fear of the unknown. There's a fear of, what are my friends going to say? There's a fear of, what in my past is going to come up that will keep me from being the same. There are so many fears that flood you. But the interesting thing was, after that moment in which I said, let's do it, and I got that response, welcome to the Archdiocese, there was peace. And I can say now, having been now a year in seminary, that peace is still there, and that peace is growing, that peace is expanding. I've done a lot in my life, I've experienced a lot in my life, I've seen a lot in my life, traveled the world, but I can say truly and honestly right now, I'm living my best life. Because of this peace that I've experienced. I don't feel like I have to work to impress anybody. Like, I'm not working to find the next big thing that I have to do in my life. No, like there's this piece of being still and allowing God to show you what it is that He wants you to do. It's uncomfortable. It has a lot of challenges. And then a lot of days you're just like, I just don't have the energy to do this. But yet, in the midst of all that, the peace remains, which means it's not anything that you have come up with. If there's a peace that remains in the midst of the chaos and the challenges and the uncomfortabilities of discernment of life, that's not a peace, that's not anything this world has given. That's definitely God. And so, to stick with that has been my calling every day to say yes. I don't know what you want me to do today. I don't know what you're going to show me today, but here I am.
As we celebrate 50 years of the Joint Conference, we also celebrate the fact that African Americans answering God's call is nothing new. From Father Augustus Tolton to Mother Harriet DeLille to Mother Lang, African Americans have played a vital role in the Catholic Church, but were at times still treated like outsiders. From these injustices grew the Joint Conference.
Yeah, they're important. They're very important because the reality is because there are not many of us in ministry. And so it becomes a way for each, whether it's a black priest or a black sister or it's a black deacon, black seminarian, in order to connect, to know that there are others, to be of support to each other in the ministry. In the Archdiocese of New Orleans, there are over 200 deacons throughout the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Out of that 200 plus deacons, there are 24 African American deacons. Out of the 24 African American deacons, 18 are active. And one was ordained. Recently, we have 2 African American men that are now beginning their formation. When I was in class, I was the only African American deacon in my class. So the reality is that we have to support each other. These organizations allow for that.
The founding of the Conference of Black Sisters, I was a part of that early foundation, those early years. And I think they were very meaningful. They were needed. The clergy as well, because the sisters, the women, black women who were members of white orders were scattered one by one or two in these huge, big, white, international, sometimes religious orders of sisters. The men were, for the most part, some were religious, but many of them were diocesan priests. Still, they were a minority in those groups. They were one among many, and it was difficult. So the idea of starting an organization of clergy and one of sisters was to help offer support so that they could be supportive of one another. My participation and other nuns who were members of black religious orders was to offer support to our sisters, fellow sisters, who are members of these white institutions. So that's why we were active and involved, and I think it was very needed at the time, very much needed. It rendered a lot of support in helping people with their identity, value in their own culture, recognizing that they had wonderful contributions to make to the church as Black women, religious, that our history is not only a history of slavery, that our history is rooted in a long tradition of rich, diverse cultures of Black people all over the world. And we had something to share. It was difficult to do that as individuals, but when we came together, it was awesome. It was just wonderful to see the expressions of talent and gifts that individual women and men brought to the organization and eventually into the church at large.
When I think about these organizations, they're important. They're important for the church because it shows that we have Black priests, Black sisters, Black deacons, Black brothers. It's important for our community to see that because we need to see ourselves. But it's important for those who are discerning. However, in today's day and age, it's important that organizations like the Clergy Caucus and the Sisters Conference not dwell on the successes of yesteryear, but call forward the gifts of today so that we can have a community and a church and these gatherings tomorrow.
And it says, even within our church, we've had struggles. We've had struggles, and we coming out of the church, knowing where the church has come from and where we as a people have had to struggle even within the church, and a church that professes that we are supposed to be equal and that we are all created in God's image. But even within the church, we've been treated as though we've not been a creation of God. Even in today's society, the reality is that we as African Americans are still not treated in the way that we should be treated. And even within the church, there's still prejudice that exist. And so these organizations allow us to be there for each other, to give strength to each other, and for others to realize that we are ministers and we minister to our people, and who better to minister to our people, than those who are right there with them.
The Clergy Caucus was found and made the statement that the Catholic Church is a white racist institution. And because of that, that was a strong statement. And a lot of people got hurt. And that's why I said it's a miracle that we're still here. A lot of people, both Black and white, wanted this group to be done away with because they thought it was too militant. And so the relevancy we see is still here. We still see as we deal with all the issues going on in our country, children being separated from their families. And we who call ourselves Christian, we who call ourselves Catholics, who know the gift of this church is because of our universality, because of our diversity, must be shared with the larger church so that we can live our creed of what we say we are, one body in Christ, and we can help America to live its creed as one nation under God.
Although it's important for us to celebrate the joint conference, we must also continue the work, to pray for Black vocations, to continue in our ministry, and to let people know that we are here and we are worth celebrating.
50 years later, we need to enter into very serious dialogue with one another to talk about how we can be more relevant today, that how this organization started 50 years ago need to re-examine its directions going forward and what kind of meaningful contribution can we make? Can we, the questions we need to raise is religious life still valid today for Black people, for Black women and men? Is the priesthood still valid today for the clergy? Is there a place in the church for religious women? And are we willing to, even as we are now, really be alive, be vibrant, be provocative, speak out forcefully on the issues of our time that are oppressing people, that are hurting people, like the issue of immigration and like the issues of our leadership in this nation that is not just, that is oppressive, that is racist, that we are willing to do what we did then, but in a more, in a stronger way, in a more direct way, to our leaders in the church, to our bishops, to our Catholic leaders who are in the church, that they need to speak as Jesus did. They need to follow Pope Francis. They need to be models. They need to be true shepherds and true leaders of the church.
It's worth it in so many ways. Just being able to share those times with families when they need you, when they feel they have no one else to talk to in the church, that they can come to you as a couple together. I go with him sometimes to blessings, to sit in on naming and blessing in church, and sometimes with baptism. You know, those things I wouldn't have been able to do before.
These organizations sustain and maintain our history, and it's necessary. You know, you cannot move forward if you have not known where you've come from. However, these organizations now more than ever have to pull on the gifts and the talents of here present. I think that's one of the challenges of the Black church in general. I was at St. August's graduation, and I hold on to this in my heart. Avery Johnson said, "We cannot be paralyzed by our failure or intoxicated by our success." And oftentimes in the Black Catholic community, we have a tendency to allow our failures to paralyze us, but also to get so drunk in love with our success that we forget that the church today, that our young people today have gifts that need to be cultivated, gifts that need to be called forward, gifts that need to be used in our community, gifts that need to be used in our church. Because the thing is, it is the energy of the young people, the energy of the young church, the energy that these new families are bringing to the church that will continue the legacy, the history.
Now the excuse, I think, is we're too old. We don't have the energy anymore. And I don't believe that. I believe we have to still be very alive and very provocative in our presence and to speak out. I think the fact that there is a lull in the vocations, you know, that we're not getting young people, many of us in religious orders have turned within. We're worried about how we're going to take care of our aged members, who will be around to take care of us, who will take care of our ministries, who will run our institutions. And so we've turned all of that focus on ourselves rather than continuing to be active as we are. I just think that That's the only way we will attract vocations, if we are doing radical things. Last Saturday, a number of us went for the march at Congo Square, opposing the separation of families, because we are sisters of the Holy Family, and we believe and we commit ourselves to the unity of family and to building up the family.
I believe that God calls you, and He calls you into the role that He wants you to play, and not every deacon will go into prison ministry. Not every deacon will go into hospital ministry, but God will lead you into what He needs you to do and where He puts you and places you. And so, was it worth it? Yeah, because, God uses me in whatever way He needs to. And so every day I just try to walk in that.
I think we are concerned that our religious orders are dying and that our charisms may die, the reason why we were founded. For example, Mother DeLille founded the Sisters of the Holy Family to care for the aged, the infirm, the uneducated during slavery in 1842 in this city, which was a slave city. It was a market for slavery. In spite of that, she founded a religious order of black women. She wanted to be a sister herself. No religious order would accept her at the time because she was a black woman or a free woman of color. That was the church. That was our society in the 1800s. So she was bold enough to start her own order. We have existed for 175 years. Last year we celebrated that. For an institution of black women to last, or for any black organization to survive over 100 years, is really a history in itself. And we still exist. But I think that we should not consider ourselves a failure if we should die. It doesn't mean we failed. It means that our charisms, our legacy, if we've done a good job, is passed on to the people of God. They will carry it on. They will keep our memory alive. They will carry on the works of Mother DeLille. So we're not saddened, I am not, that our community is diminishing. I think that if we continue, it'll be very few young women that will be choosing this way of life. But it doesn't mean that the life is less valid, that it's less meaningful. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that young people have many options today to serve, and they are generous. They are serving. There are many young people who are choosing other forms of life and are giving service and are caring. But maybe religious life is not the calling that they have. But it doesn't mean that the good works will not continue. So that's what I want to say about religious life, that it's a great life, but very few are called.
Well, I think so we celebrating 50 years of the joint conference, of the contribution of Black Catholic clergy to the church. Celebrate. We need to celebrate so that we don't forget. But we need to make sure that in that celebration that we are including the voices that sit in the pew. That in that celebration, we're including the young people who would not necessarily be in church. The ones that are out there on the street corner who don't know where their next meal may be coming from, who may be selling Lord knows what to get their next meal, or what they need to be included in the celebration. Because one of the beautiful things about Black Catholics has always been our ability to look out for our community. Regardless if you were Catholic, if you came from the 9th ward, from the 7th ward, if you were Passe Blanc, or you were the color purple. That's one of the things we gotta recapture. In a world that is so divided, in a world that is so divisive, we as a community can't be just as divisive or divided. We as a community can't be so jealous of one another. We have to, when we celebrate, and we have to celebrate 50 years of Black Catholic clergy coming together, because there was a time when there were no Black Catholic clergy caucuses or Black sister conferences or the National Black Catholic Congress. There was a time when Black Catholics could not gather as a body. And oftentimes we go through this world, and sometimes we think it feels like we've taken major steps back to times when we were not allowed to sit at the table. But to this moment, we celebrate. But we gotta remember what we did to get here. Who we included at the table, at our table. We want to talk about inclusion at the table. Yes, there's a bigger table out there that we need to be at. And there are people there, and we support those people who are at those tables, fighting those fights that many people don't see. But who's not at our table? Let's look around and see who's sitting at the table with us.
1 Corinthians 12:12 says that we are many parts of one body, and Black Catholics are not monolithic. We're just as diverse as every other group. And so the joint conference of the priests, religious sisters, and brothers, deacons, and their wives, and seminarians are just as diverse. And when there's a diversity, look at groups that have come and gone, especially a group like this, a fledgling group that began because of the sin of racism, that we're still here is a reason to celebrate, because there'll be many who'll say that the time for the group is passé. It's over. Racism does no longer exist. But we know in the year 2018, as we see things are going on in our politics, that the racism is here, just as strong, if not stronger, because it's become very covert. The relevancy of this group is still so important, because it gives the church an opportunity to see one strong, vibrant part of the most needed part of our church, of being one together. And so that we can come, not just for Black people, but for all people, Hispanic, European American, no matter where you come from. We need to be all a part of this church to understand all our giftedness and what makes us all part of this body of Christ.
Thanks for watching, and once again, welcome to the Joint Conference. Have a great time in New Orleans. Laissez le bon temps rouler.